Hey everyone, it's Batch 3.23 Affliction, and today we're going to be talking about how to craft items for Self-Ignite Chieftain. This is going to be the companion guide to my Self-Ignite Chieftain guide, and the full build guide will be linked in the description below. But today we're going to be talking about how to craft some of the various items that are going to be required in a much higher end setup for this build. We're going to be talking about how to craft ourselves a Chaos Resistance and Mana Reservation Suffix helmet that is going to have life regeneration rate on it, +2 AoE prefixes, and physical damage taken as fire. We're going to be talking about how to craft a pair of gloves that has double regen on it. So it's going to have flat regen and regen rate, as well as chaos resistance. And then we're going to add on life as a prefix and damage while leeching. And lastly, we're going to talk about how to craft ourselves a pair of boots that's going to be the same as the gloves. It's going to be double regen with chaos res and then movement speed and life as a prefix. So why don't we get started by talking about the helmet? So for the helmet, ideally, we're going to want to use a Royal Berg. It doesn't really matter exactly which base you use, but you're going to want to use a high armor base, as armor is really the only thing we care about in this build. So first, you're going to be starting off by buying yourself a Fractured Tier 1 Chaos Resistance helmet. Now, if you can't afford Tier 1 Chaos Resistance, that's okay. You can just go for a lower roll. Just get whatever base that you feel comfortable to start this with. The first step that we're going to be doing in this craft is to be using RMR essences to get mana reservation efficiency in our helmet, and we're going to be rolling until we hit tier 1 life regeneration rate, as this is going to give us substantially more regen than flat regen. As we can see here, we have a 1 in 91 chance of getting this, and that might seem a little bit bad. If you've done any sort of crafting loathing essences, you might know they're kind of expensive, but the nice thing about this build is we do not need to use deafening essences. We're going to be using shrieking essences. So we're going to be spamming, and it's going to take a few essences. It's a 191 chance until we get ourselves a helmet that looks something like this. We're going to have a shrieking mana reservation efficiency roll on it, so 7 to 8, and we are then going to also have tier 1 life regeneration rate on it. Now, one very important thing here is that you're going to need 8% increased mana reservation efficiency specifically. If you do not get 8, you will either need to divine this to 8, or you will need to run a mana reservation efficiency jewel until you divine that to 8%. 8% is a pretty hard requirement for us to be able to fit in everything. So eventually we're going to get ourselves a helmet that looks like this, that has all the suffixes that we need. Now, one thing I want to mention is, what if at the same time you also end up getting full prefixes? So let's say you just get a bunch of junk that looks something like this. You get a bunch of undesirable prefixes that you don't want. The first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to clean those up. So we need at least one open prefix. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to simply use any of the embers on it. It doesn't matter if it's lesser, greater, or grand, as long as it's not influenced. If this, for example, has, let's say, a greater ichor on it already, you'd have to use a grand ember to make the Searing Exarch tier higher, or you could use like a lesser ichor first to make the Eater Worlds tier lower, and then use something like a grand ember to save a little bit of money. But the point is, if it already has some sort of influence on it, you need to make sure the Searing Exarch influence is higher. That is going to allow us to use an Eldritch Orb of Annul, and it's going to always remove a prefix off of the item. We just need one open prefix. So if you only have a helmet with 2 prefixes on it, or 1 prefixes, or none, it really depends. It's a little bit RNG and what's going to happen when you roll with essences. But as long as you have just one open prefix, we are then going to take this over to the crafting bench, and then we are going to craft suffixes cannot be changed on it. Now, another option, instead of using suffixes cannot be changed, which is to div, is to buy yourself a wild bristle matron and use this instead. This is one of the harvest beasts that's only available from Einhar Memories. And what this does is it gives you a meta mod crafting option. Specifically here, because we are only have prefixes or only open one, the only meta mod option it could hit is suffixes cannot be changed. Meaning, if you go out of your way and buy one of these beasts and use it, then you save yourself effectively currently 0.7 div instead of spending the full 2 div that this would cost off the bench. So I'd really recommend to do that instead. Now we have a helmet with suffixes cannot be changed on it. What we're going to do next is then take a Veiled Chaos Orb, and we are going to Veil Chaos Orb the helmet. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to guarantee give us a prefix without touching any of our suffixes. What might happen here is you might get either a veiled prefix with no other prefixes on the item, which is fairly common, or you might potentially get yourself a veiled prefix and then 2 random garbage prefixes. If this happens, you will need to use a YOLO Annul and pray for the 2 in 3 chance that one of the garbage prefixes is eaten instead of the veiled prefix that we want to keep. So in this case, we would have won, but if our veiled prefix gets eaten like this, then unfortunately, we would have to go get another wild bristle matron, put suffixes cannot be changed back onto this helmet, and then we would have to Veiled Chaos Orb again. But the point is, we need a veiled prefix, and we need at least one open prefix on this helmet. Once we get a helmet that looks like this, we are then going to craft specifically +1 maximum number of raised zombies and +1 number of raised skeletons. The reason we are doing this is because we are specifically trying to hit +2 socketed AoE gems. As you can see, we have a 37% chance to unveil this. If you look at the total mod pool of things we can unveil, we can see that we have almost a 50% chance to get +1 skeletons and +1 zombies. So if we instead craft it beforehand, as you can see, it's removed from the pool, and now our chance of getting +2 AoE gems goes to 43% chance. That still doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but we are going to craft it on here, and then we are going to unveil and pray. If we get it, awesome, we can finish the rest of our craft. Now, unfortunately, if we don't get it, then what we would have to do, we'd have to remove the +1 zombies, +1 skeletons, and then go and recraft suffixes cannot be changed back on here and veiled chaos orb again and try one more time. We would need to keep repeating this until we actually do get our +2 AoE. This is going to take a few attempts. As I mentioned, it is only a 47% chance, so it's going to take quite a few attempts. But once you get it, you are effectively done with the helmet. Now, you might get a helmet that looks like this, where we're going to have our +2 AoE prefix and a crafted prefix. And you might also potentially get a random garbage roll on here as well. Who really knows? But all we really need to do at this point is we just need to go back to the crafting bench and remove our +1 zombies, +1 skeletons from the helmet, and to just simply finish the craft by going and putting on physical damage taken as fire. This is going to finish up all of your prefixes. And if you did end up actually having an open prefix with nothing there, if you end up finishing your craft with just +2 AoE gems and the physical as fire, what you could do at the end is you could just exalted orb and pray that you get something good. There really isn't much else you can do here, and there's no way to really influence this other than just a raw exalt, but pray you hit tier 1 life, and if you hit tier 1 life, then you have yourself a godlike helmet for this build. The last thing we would do to finish up crafting this helmet would be to use Grand Embers to get ourselves AoE on the helmet. You can use greater or lesser as well if you're on a little bit of a lower budget, but with the Searing Exarch, you are looking to roll for increased area of effect. And then we are going to use Grand Ichors, or again, greater Ichors if you're on a budget, or lesser Ichors if you're on a budget. And we are looking to roll any of the physical damage taken as rolls. Now, we do not want physical damage taken as chaos. We need everything but physical damage taken as chaos, as we do not have enough chaos res to deal with the extra damage. We would want it to be either as fire, cold, or lightning. Ideally, you roll it until it hits either cold or fire. We do not want it to be physical damage taken as lightning. But if you do end up getting something like this, where you get physical damage taken as lightning, then that's okay. It is what it is. And we just take the helmet as a finished helmet. And there you go. You're ready to go explode things with the helmet. Up next, let's talk about the gloves. So the gloves are going to be relatively easy as well, with one portion of it potentially being really expensive depending on what your budget is. So to start with the gloves, ideally we want to use the pair of Titan gauntlets, but realistically any base works here. What we want to do is we're going to want to get ourselves a pair of gloves with either fractured tier 1 life regeneration rates or fractured tier 1 life per second. It really doesn't matter which of these two fractures you're going to go for, as they're both going to make the craft just as easy as each other. You're simply going to look for the cheapest one. So if tier 1 life regeneration rate is cheaper, get a pair of gloves with that. If tier 1 flat regen is cheaper, get a pair of gloves with that. It does not matter. So let's say we are working with a pair of tier 1 flat life regen gloves. What we're then going to do is we are going to use envy essences to give us a guaranteed chaos resistance roll on our gloves, and we are going to roll for the other thing that we're missing. So in this case, we have fractured tier 1 life, so we need to roll for tier 1 life regeneration rate. As you can see, it's a 1 in 85 chance to hit it. And if you want to very quickly look at the opposite version of this, if you want to look at tier 1 life regeneration rate and us rolling for flat regen, as you can see, it's also basically a 1 in 88. There is literally no difference between the two. So we're going to be spamming our essences, and eventually we're going to be running into a pair of gloves that look something like this. We'll have the essence tier 1 roll on it, and then we will also have the tier 1 life regeneration rates that we went for. So now our suffixes are completely done. Next is going to be the very expensive portion of this. We are going to be looking for any sort of life roll that you're comfortable with. The TLDR of what's going to happen is we are going to put a Searing Exarch implicit on our gloves, so they are now Searing Exarch dominant. And if they do have, for some reason, a Eater roll on it, you'd want to lower it by using a lesser Ichor and then using something like a greater Ember, so we can make sure the Searing Exarch roll is the dominant one. And then we are going to go to the crafting bench, and we are going to craft either flat armor or percent armor. It doesn't matter which one you do, as it's going to be the same exact chance. And then we are going to be exalt orbing for either tier 3 life or higher. Now, this is going to really depend on you. As you can see here, you have a 1 in 37 chance of hitting tier 3 or higher life. Obviously, if you want to go for something like tier 1 life, life, it's going to be a 1 in 111. It's going to be substantially more expensive to do. So this step is going to be down to how much can you really afford. So it's just going to be a question of how much are you really willing to put into these gloves. Either way, as I mentioned, we are going to go to the crafting bench and craft either percent armor or flat armor. It doesn't matter as they're going to remove the same total amount of weight from the pool. And then we are going to use 2 exalted orbs on the gloves. And as I mentioned, we have a 1 in 33 chance of seeing tier 4 or higher life. And you're just going to simply go until you get a life amount that you like. After we double X-Slam like this, we are going to go back to the bench, remove the crafted armor that we put on it, and then we are going to use 2 Eldritch Annul orbs to remove both of those prefixes. We can infinitely repeat this process until we get the desired outcome. So now we would go back to the bench, craft our percent or our flat armor, use 2 more exalted orbs, and we would do this until we hit life. So here we hit tier 7 life. If I were to exalted orb again, I couldn't hit another life. So at this point, I would just immediately remove the crafted mod, get another Eldritch Annul, and remove the life because the life is too low. I don't want to really keep that. I would then go again and just throw an Eldritch Exalt. And as you can see here, I hit tier 2 life. So here I'd be pretty happy tier 2 life and I would stop at this. What we would then do from this point, or after you are sick and tired of X-Slam, remove the craft, Eldritch Annul until you hit tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, whatever tier life you want. We would now finish up the craft by simply going to the bench, and instead of putting percent armor on our gloves, we are then going to change out the roll for increased damage while leeching. In this build, you are always leeching, meaning this is just a raw 43% increased damage for our explosions. At the end of this, if you end up hitting the life on your first hit, you can just go again and pray that you get a good prefix as your last prefix. Or if you hit the life on your second roll, well, then you would only have 1 prefix left and you just craft the damage while leeching on it and you have yourself a pair of gloves. Lastly, to finish up these gloves, we would be using Grand Embers, and then we would be doing this until we roll for fire damage over time multiplier. And then we would be using Grand Ichors until we roll for fire exposure on hit. And then once we do all that, we would have ourselves a perfect pair of gloves for the build. The last thing to talk about is going to be a pair of boots. So the boots are going to be kind of similar to the gloves in terms of how we're going to get the suffixes, but then we're going to be doing what we did for the prefixes of the helmet instead, where we're going to be using a Veiled Chaos Orb to finish off the prefixes. As for the helmet and gloves, we just simply want to use the best armor base we can get, but at the end of the day, what's going to matter is going to be the fracture that you get on it. So the same thing as the gloves, we are simply going to either be buying a pair of boots that have either tier 1 fractured life regeneration on it or tier 1 fractured life regen per second on it. Again, just like the gloves, you're simply going to buy the fracture that is going to be cheaper, as they're going to be the same exact price in terms of crafting. If tier 1 life regeneration rate is cheaper, then we're going to be crafting for tier 1 flat life. And then if tier 1 flat life is cheaper as a fracture, we're going to be crafting for tier 1 regeneration rate. So in this case, let's pretend that we again bought a fractured flat life regen pair of boots, and we are going to be rolling for tier 1 life regeneration rate. As you can see, we're going to be using Deafening Essences of Envy again to get ourselves a tier 1 chaos resistance roll, and it's going to be a 1 in 75 chance to get tier 1 life regeneration rate. After a few essences, you should end up with a pair of boots that look something like this, where we have our fractured roll, we have tier 1 life regeneration rate, and then we have the essence tier 1 chaos res roll. So once our suffixes are done, our prefixes are going to be fairly simple. First, if you ended up getting any sort of random junk prefixes, and let's say your boots look something like this, we need to clean up the prefixes. You might not have full prefixes like this. It really depends. Rolling with essences is a little bit RNG, but we need to have at least 1 empty prefix no matter what. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go and get ourselves a Lesser Ember and use it on the boots to give it Searing Exarch influence. Now, if your boots for some reason have a really high Eater influence on them already, make sure you use a Lesser Ichor to lower the Eater influence, and then use something like a Greater Ember to make it bigger. Your boots really shouldn't have any sort of influence on them in the first place, so you just use any Exarch Ember to give them Exarch influence. From here, now that our Exarch is dominant, we can use an Eldritch Orb of Annul to guarantee remove a prefix without touching any of our suffixes. From this point, all we're going to have to do is we are going to have to either take it to the crafting bench and craft suffixes cannot be changed, or instead, what I would recommend, instead of doing this, is to go and buy yourself a Wild Bristle Matron, which currently are about 1.3 div each, which is about 0.7 div cheaper than a crafting option, and go to the bestiary and use this as a way to put suffixes cannot be changed on your boots. What the Wild Bristle Matron does is it will always put a metamod role on your item. So in this case, because we only have an open prefix, it can only put suffixes cannot be changed, effectively making this a cheaper suffixes cannot be changed. Once we have this on here, we are then going to take ourselves a Veiled Chaos Orb and we are going to use it on the boots. Now, what might happen here is instead of just having one veiled prefix like this, you might have a veiled prefix and it might end up giving you some random garbage like this to where all of your prefixes are full. Before we go any further, if your prefixes are full like this, we would need to clean them up. So we would need to take an Eldritch Null Orb and we would have to take a 2 in 3 chance that's going to remove one of the 2 prefixes that isn't the veiled prefix. Now, unfortunately, if you get unlucky like this, you would have to then get another Wild Bristle Matron, go back and put your suffixes cannot be changed on it, and then you'd have to Veiled Chaos Orb again. But most of the time, that's not going to happen. You're either going to maybe get one prefix, or most of the time, you're just going to get your veiled prefix by itself with nothing else on the boots. Next up, before we go any further, we want to craft the prefix on these boots because we want to block some of the possible modifiers that the veiled prefix might be able to give us. So if we quickly look at all the modifiers available for us, we can see we have a 50% chance to get one of the movement speed modifiers. Well, we can make this a little bit better by either crafting life or mana on our boots to block the life and mana rolls. So all we're going to do is we're just simply going to go to the bench, and before we unveil, we will just go put on any of the flat life rolls. If we look really quickly, if I were to add flat life to this, we remove this roll completely, and instead of a 50% chance, we have a 57% chance to get any of the movement speed rolls. Now, one thing I want to mention about this is if you end up getting the 100% chance to avoid being chilled one, that is a brick. We cannot accept that. 100% chance to avoid being chilled means we cannot self-chill in this build anymore, making us lose a large portion of our total movement speed. So we need either the onslaught kill or the movement speed if you haven't been here recently. So once we put our crafted prefix on there, it's time to unveil, and we're going to most of the time see one of the movement speed rolls. Now, if this doesn't happen, and if we don't see a movement speed roll, and let's say we get this one, for example, avoid being chilled, or we just don't see any at all, we would have to do this again. So in this case, the boots would be bricked, and what I'd have to do is I'd have to remove my crafted life, go back and get another Wild Bristle Matron, put suffixes cannot be changed back on the boots, and try again. Then once again, I would go to the bench, craft life. In this case, I do have an open prefix. I'd be able to craft life. I wouldn't have to null for an open prefix, and I would just unveil. And in this case, we got movement speed if you haven't been hit recently. At this point, all we would have to do to finish up these boots is to take off the life roll that we put on the boots in the first place and just change it up for a tier 1 crafted life roll. Lastly, to finish the boots, we just need to quickly use some Eldritch Currency on it. So first we would use specifically Lesser Embers. You do not want to use Greater or Grands as it does not make a difference in this case. And we would be rolling for 1% maximum fire resistance. This is a somewhat common roll and it should only take you a few, but Greaters and Grands also only give you 1% maximum fire res. So just save yourself some money and use Lessers. Then lastly, for the Eater rolls, ideally we'd use Grand Ickers, but if you're on a budget, you can use Greater or Lesser. And we are looking to roll increased life regeneration rate, just like the suffix that is on our boots. This one is sometimes a little bit more rare, but once you do end up getting the life regeneration rate roll on it, you are completely done with your boots and you are ready to blast. And that's all there really is for crafting and boots. Overall, they're a very simple craft and they're very straightforward. And I just hope you get some good luck on your unveils. That's all there really is for this guide. I hope that answered all of your questions on how to craft the boots, gloves, and helmet for this build. As I mentioned, these are all fairly expensive crafts and you do not need these to actually play this build. You can simply just use the trade links in the notes section and buy yourself a somewhat weaker item that someone has already made or maybe found on the ground that will work just fine for the build. But if you want to make yourself a better version of it, this is how you'd go about making the better items for this build. If you have any other questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to answer them whenever I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so if you want to ask your question personally, please feel free to come by my Twitch and ask there. And if you just want to come hang out with all the cuties, I'll be more than happy to be there as well. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you cuties in the next video.